Why was she standing there, so still, as if she didn't quite belong? The parade ground in Okinawa shimmered under the morning sun, the air heavy with heat and discipline. Boots struck the asphalt in perfect rhythm, the sharp bark of orders echoing across the base. Young recruits, some barely past 20, stood stiff at attention, sweat already sliding down their temples. And yet, among all the rigid postures and fresh uniforms, there was one figure who seemed different. Lieutenant Sarah Keating. To the eye, she was unremarkable. Early 30s, lean, sharp-eyed. She wore no ribbons that told stories, no insignia that drew second glances. Her uniform carried the plain weight of someone who had been shuffled into a logistics unit, a background posting. A name buried in rosters, overlooked in reports. Ordinary. That was the picture she wanted them to see. But pictures lie. And if anyone had been watching closely, if anyone had felt the subtle gravity of her presence, they might have noticed that the men around her stood just a little straighter when she passed. No one knew why, not even them, but they felt it. Colonel James Whitaker felt it most of all. He was a man forged from 3 decades of war, tall, broad-shouldered, a voice that could command a storm. His legend stretched back to firefights in Helmand, Fallujah, Mosul. Unshakable, unbreakable. His men called him iron-willed. But that morning, as he scanned personnel files and crossed the courtyard, something shifted. He stopped. Sarah's name caught his eye. Keating, Sarah, clean record, too clean, too few details. Assignments that began and ended with little trace. The kind of file that didn't feel neglected, it felt erased, redacted, deliberately thinned until nothing was left but a shell of service. He felt his gut tighten. And then, in front of the entire formation, he did something he had never done to a logistics officer. He stopped, shadow casting over her face, and asked, "Lieutenant, what's your call sign?" Silence fell like a dropped blade. Every recruit stiffened, eyes darting, confused. A call sign. That was the language of aviators, special operators, not for supply clerks or paper pushers, not for someone like her. Sarah's hazel eyes lifted, calm, steady. There was no tremor in her voice when she spoke. Phantom 7. The world seemed to stop. The colonel froze. His breath caught, his jaw clenched. For a man who had stood in the middle of ambushes and mortar fire without flinching, the sight was shocking. His eyes widened just slightly, but enough for those closest to him to see something they never thought possible. Fear. He swallowed, trying to hide it, but his hand trembled, the glassy reflection of sunlight on his ring betraying him. The recruits looked at each other in disbelief. Phantom 7. The name meant nothing to them, but the colonel's reaction, it meant everything. Abruptly, Whitaker cleared his throat, voice breaking the moment. Formation dismissed. Confused murmurs rippled across the courtyard as the young Marines filed away, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Only Sarah remained, her gaze unbroken, her posture steady. "You my office now." The blinds were drawn, the door locked. The air in Colonel Whitaker's office felt heavy, suffocating. He poured a glass of water, but his hand shook so much the rim tapped against the pitcher. He hated that. He had faced the worst the world could throw at him, but 3 words from a woman in logistics had rattled him. Phantom 7. He muttered it again under his breath, as if saying it aloud might break the spell. "I thought you were a ghost story, a rumor, a name whispered by men who never came back from Black Ops missions." Sarah stood at attention, expression unreadable, hands clasped behind her back. Her silence was more powerful than words. "I didn't expect anyone here to recognize it," she said quietly. Whitaker leaned against his desk, his chest rising and falling with something heavier than breath. Memory pressed down on him. Afghanistan, Helmand Province, 2010. His voice softened as if speaking it could summon ghosts. "My unit was pinned down for hours. We were running out of ammo, out of hope. Enemy fire rained down and I thought," he trailed off, eyes distant, I thought we were finished. Sarah's gaze didn't waver, though her knuckles tightened slightly behind her back. But then, he continued, a team came, silent, invisible. They moved like shadows, swept in without a sound, pulled us out one by one. I never saw their faces, just the whispers of call signs in the dark. And there was one name the enemy feared above all. He locked eyes with her. Phantom 7. Silence. Her breath was steady, her face unreadable, but silence was its own kind of confirmation. Whitaker exhaled, the sound ragged, almost reverent. That was you. For the first time in his career, he felt like a student before a teacher, humbled by someone who had walked deeper into the abyss than even he had dared. But she broke his gaze, her voice low. I was where they told me to be. I did what I had to do. When it was over, they didn't need a hero. They needed a ghost, so I disappeared. The colonel's brow furrowed. And now you're here, hiding in logistics. Her eyes flickered with something, pain or maybe relief. Because ghosts get tired, Colonel, and I didn't come back to fight. I came back to rest. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Two soldiers, two histories, colliding in a room that suddenly felt too small for all the weight it carried. Outside, the world of the base spun on. Orders shouted. Engines roared. Recruits laughed in the mess hall. None of them knew that in one quiet office, a secret had just resurfaced, a legend walking among them. But Sarah knew something the colonel didn't. Rest was a fragile dream, and the world, it rarely let ghosts rest. That night she lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above her. She could still see the colonel's eyes, the way fear had crept into his iron frame. It wasn't pride she felt, not satisfaction. It was exhaustion. She had spent years wearing that name. Phantom 7, a blade in the dark, a shadow slipping between borders, ending lives so others could live. She had carried missions no one spoke of, seen things no one admitted happened. And when the orders stopped, when the government folded her file into a drawer that no one could access, she thought she could finally be free. But freedom wasn't silence. Freedom was facing the memories. And some nights like this one, the silence screamed louder than the battles ever had. She turned on her side, closed her eyes, tried to breathe, tried to let the past stay buried. But even in her dreams, the shadows came back. Morning returned, bright and merciless. She moved through her duties in logistics as though nothing had happened. Paperwork, supply routes, numbers on clipboards. She played the part. But she felt the eyes now. The colonel's eyes, watching, waiting. At chow, the younger Marines talked about sports, girlfriends, weekend passes. She listened quietly. Someone cracked a joke about how boring logistics was. Sarah smiled faintly, but inside she thought, if only you knew. The truth was, she longed to be ordinary, to laugh at bad jokes, to gripe about food rations, to be just another officer blending into the noise of daily life. But deep down, she knew that Phantom 7 wasn't gone. Phantom 7 was sleeping, and sleep never lasted long. Late that afternoon, she was called to the colonel's office again. She hesitated at the door, hand hovering over the knob, heartbeat tapping against her ribs. Inside, Whitaker sat behind his desk, map spread before him. His expression was carved from stone, but there was something softer in his eyes now. Not fear, not suspicion. Respect, maybe. He looked up. Lieutenant, I don't know why you're here, and I won't ask, but I know this. Whatever ghosts you're carrying, they don't make you weak. They make you dangerous, and sometimes the Corps still needs dangerous. Sarah didn't answer, didn't trust herself to. She only gave a slow nod, then turned to leave. Behind her, the colonel whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. Phantom 7, God help us if the world drags you back into the fight. But the world was already moving. And somewhere beyond the safety of Okinawa, a storm was brewing. Who would volunteer for a mission everyone else feared? The briefing room was heavy with tension. the stale air filled with maps, radios, and the hum of fluorescent lights. Officers gathered around the table, their faces grim, eyes fixed on a map spread wide across the surface. Red markers dotted the terrain, small symbols for ambushes, enemy checkpoints, mined roads. A convoy had gone down. Humanitarian supplies, food, medicine. What should have been routine had turned into a nightmare. The worst part wasn't the cargo, it was the people. A young lieutenant, barely out of the academy, had been captured alive with a handful of civilians. The ambush had been precise, calculated. Whoever had orchestrated it knew the terrain, the timing, the weaknesses. Colonel Whitaker leaned against the table, jaw set, shoulders heavy with command. He had been through missions like this before, always the same equations: risk, losses, probability of success. But the numbers didn't add up. Every route in was covered. Every angle a trap. Sending Marines meant losing Marines. And that he could not accept lightly. His voice was low, steady. This mission is deemed too dangerous for immediate recovery. We'll monitor, wait for opportunity, negotiate if possible. The room shifted, relief mixed with guilt. No one wanted to say it out loud, but they were thinking it. Better a few lost than an entire platoon. And then from the back of the room, a voice. "I'll go." Every head turned. Sarah stood there calm, hands at her sides. Her face betrayed nothing, but her voice cut through the silence like steel through cloth. "I know the terrain. I know how to get in and out without leaving a trace. Let me do it." The room erupted in murmurs. Officers exchanged confused looks. A logistics officer, volunteering for a high-risk extraction. It didn't make sense. Colonel Whitaker stared at her, eyes narrowing, something sharp flickering behind them. "Lieutenant Keating, this is not your concern," he said, voice firm. "With respect, sir," she replied, stepping forward, "I've been in worse terrain. I've been surrounded before. I've brought men out who thought they'd never see daylight again. I can do this." The colonel's jaw tightened. He knew the truth of her words, though no one else in the room did. And that truth burned in him because he also knew the cost. To send her was to send Phantom 7. To unleash a part of her she had buried, perhaps forever. "No," he said finally, shaking his head. "If anyone goes, it's a team. You don't walk in there alone." Sarah's eyes met his, calm, unyielding. "With respect, Colonel, a team makes noise. Phantom 7 doesn't." The name hung in the air like a blade suspended on a thread. The other officers blinked, unsure what they'd just heard, thinking maybe they had misheard. But Whitaker knew. He saw the room blur for a moment, felt the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing against his ribs. He could order her to stand down. He could bury her in paperwork and let the captured lieutenant rot in enemy hands. Or he could let the past walk again. Let Phantom 7 slip out of the shadows one more time. His throat tightened. He gave a sharp nod. "Go, but you move tonight, and if you don't make it back." "I will." There was no arrogance in her voice, no bravado, just certainty. When night fell, she prepared in silence. No heavy packs, no glowing devices, nothing that would slow her or catch light. She strapped a combat knife to her thigh, checked her sidearm, adjusted her boots. But more than gear, she carried something unseen, the return of instincts long buried. She caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman in logistics fatigues was gone. In her place stood Phantom 7, the shadow that enemies whispered about, the ghost mothers warned their sons about. And yet inside, she wasn't sure if that ghost was strength or curse. Her hand hovered over the photograph tucked inside her locker. It was old, frayed at the edges. A woman standing with 2 children, smiling under a summer sky. Not her family, but a family she had once saved. The mother had pressed the picture into Sarah's hand afterward, tears in her eyes. "So you'll remember why you fight," she'd said. Sarah closed her eyes. She remembered too well. "Ghosts get tired," she whispered to herself, "but they don't stop walking." She slipped the photo into her chest pocket, locked her locker, and stepped into the night. Colonel Whitaker waited at the edge of the airfield, watching her approach. He said nothing at first, just studied her face. For a moment, he thought he saw weariness in her eyes, but beneath it, something harder. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. She adjusted her gloves, gave the faintest nod. "Once you cross that line," he said, "you don't come back the same, you know that." Her gaze softened for just a moment. "Colonel, I never came back the same, not once." Whitaker exhaled, heavy, knowing there was nothing left to say. He wanted to protect her, to pull her back into the safety of anonymity. But deep down, he also knew that without her, the boy in that camp would die. "Bring him home," he said finally. Sarah gave no reply. She simply turned, melted into the darkness, and was gone. Hours later, the convoy's wreckage lay silent under the moonlight. Burned trucks, twisted metal, black smoke curling into the night sky. The enemy camp was just beyond the ridge, lit by orange fires, laughter echoing faintly. Sarah crouched low, eyes scanning, body still as stone. She slowed her breathing, let the rhythm of the night swallow her. She counted guards, tracked their paths, watched the flicker of shadows. She was invisible, patient, a predator who did not rush. Every step was memory, every breath muscle memory. It was as if her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget, moving unseen, reading terrain like a language, listening to silence until silence spoke. And yet beneath the precision, something churned inside her. She didn't want this anymore. She didn't want the rush of blood in her ears, the weight of life and death pressing on her hands. She wanted to sleep without dreaming of faces she could not save. She wanted to laugh at stupid jokes in the mess hall without hearing gunfire in the distance. But ghosts did not get to choose. Ghosts walked where the living could not. She moved. Inside the camp, the captured lieutenant sat slumped against the wall of a makeshift prison. His wrists were raw from rope, his lips cracked from thirst. He thought of his parents back home, of the academy graduation photo still hanging in their living room. He thought of dying here, nameless, forgotten. The door creaked. He froze, his heart raced. Enemy footsteps, another interrogation. But instead, a figure slipped inside, silent as breath. A finger pressed to her lips. "Stay quiet," she whispered. His eyes widened. He didn't know who she was, but something in her voice stilled him. She moved with calm certainty, cutting his restraints in seconds. "We're leaving." In the distance, a guard turned. But before he could raise an alarm, he felt a hand cover his mouth, a sharp twist, silence forever. Sarah moved through the camp like smoke, guiding the young lieutenant, every motion calculated, precise. She disabled lanterns, stepped between shadows, dismantled danger before it breathed. Not a shot fired, not a sound made. When they finally crested the ridge, the boy gasped for air, disbelief flooding his face. He looked at her, eyes wide with something like awe. "Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer, she only kept moving. At the extraction point, the colonel stood waiting with his men, their faces lit by the dim red glow of flares. When Sarah emerged from the shadows, the boy alive at her side, a ripple went through the Marines. Whitaker's chest tightened. The sight was too familiar, like a memory replayed. "Phantom 7. He whispered the name to himself, reverent, fearful. And Sarah, face unreadable, said only, "I told you I didn't come back to fight, but sometimes the fight finds you." But she knew, deep in her bones, that the fight had only just begun. Why did the story spread so quickly, when no one was supposed to know? The mission had ended quietly. No reports filed with her name, no official record acknowledging who had slipped into enemy lines and carried a young lieutenant back to safety. On paper, it was a mystery, a recovery operation that shouldn't have worked, explained away as support from an unnamed element. But whispers are harder to erase than ink. By the next morning, mess halls buzzed with rumors. A shadow had walked into the enemy camp, unseen, untouched, and walked back out with a prisoner. Some said it was an operator from Delta. Others swore it was a ghost unit borrowed from the CIA. But no one could prove it. No one dared ask. And yet, a name began to echo softly in corners, passed from one Marine to another like a half-believed prayer. Phantom 7. Sarah kept her head down. She carried supply reports, signed off on equipment lists, checked crates and manifests as if she hadn't just walked through fire the night before. Her face was calm, but her chest carried a weight that deepened with every passing glance she felt at her back. In the chow hall, a group of young recruits argued quietly. "I heard it was one of us," one said, leaning in. "No way, whoever it was moved like nothing human. Phantom 7, they called her." Her, another scoffed. "Phantom 7's just a story, a ghost." "Maybe, but ask Colonel Whitaker, he knows something." Sarah didn't look up from her tray. She didn't need to. Their words cut sharper than any blade. Every syllable pulled her further from the anonymity she had fought so hard to protect. Colonel Whitaker noticed it too. The way men stiffened when Sarah entered a room, the way her presence lingered long after she left. Respect, yes, but also fear. The kind of awe reserved for myths, not fellow Marines. He called her into his office again. "Lieutenant," he gestured for her to sit, though she remained standing. "Do you know what's happening out there?" Her jaw tightened. "I know what's being said. They're saying Phantom 7 is real, that you're real." Silence. Whitaker leaned forward, elbows pressing into the desk. "Do you understand what that means? Ghosts are useful when they stay ghosts, but once people start believing in them, they stop being shadows and start being targets." Sarah's eyes flickered just briefly. Targets for who? The kind of people who don't want the past dug up. The kind of enemies who remember what you did to them in the dark. The kind of allies who'd rather silence you than let you walk free with secrets they buried. She looked down, breathing slow, steady. She had known this would come. Every step back into the shadows carried a price. "I didn't ask for this," she murmured. Whitaker's voice softened. "I know, but it found you just like it always does." That night, Sarah sat alone on the roof of her barracks. The base sprawled below, alive with the glow of security lights and the hum of generators. She watched it like an outsider, as if she weren't part of it, as if she were already gone. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from memory. She remembered other rooftops, other nights, the wind against her cheek as she steadied her rifle, the soft click of a radio, the pulse in her throat before she squeezed the trigger. Faces came back to her, not enemies, friends, men who never made it home, men who had whispered her call sign in the dark as she pulled them out of fire, men who trusted her with their last breath. And the ones she couldn't save. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the tide. Ghosts were not supposed to feel. Ghosts were supposed to vanish. But the weight of the living and the dead clung to her, heavy as armor. A voice inside her whispered, "You can't run from this, not anymore." 2 days later, she was summoned to a secure briefing room. The colonel sat at the head of the table, flanked by intelligence officers. The air was colder here, sharper. On the screen, satellite images flickered. Convoys, compounds, movements traced in red. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were advancing, bolder, more organized. The ambush that had taken the lieutenant wasn't random. It was the beginning of something larger. One officer spoke, his voice clipped. "We've intercepted chatter. They know Phantom 7 is alive, and they're hunting." The room fell into silence. Sarah felt the words like ice in her chest. She had always known she was a shadow from another world, one that lived in silence. But now the silence had been broken. "They want revenge," the officer continued. "They want the ghost who humiliated them, and they'll spill blood to find you." Whitaker's eyes shifted to her, steady, searching. "Lieutenant, this is your chance to disappear again. We can transfer you, bury you deeper than before." She didn't answer, didn't trust herself too, because a different thought had already taken root in her mind. Disappear again. Run while others bled for her shadow. She had done that once before. She had told herself it was for survival that she had earned rest. But deep down she knew the truth. Ghosts didn't rest. Ghosts carried burdens until they broke. Her fists clenched at her sides. "No," she said finally, voice low. "If they're coming, then I'll be here, waiting." After the briefing, Whitaker caught her in the hallway. His voice was softer now, almost fatherly. "You can't carry the weight of the world alone, Sarah. You're not invincible." She looked at him, her eyes tired, haunted. "Colonel, I've never been invincible. I've just been invisible." And she walked away before he could say another word. The days that followed were restless. Sarah kept to her routines, checklists, supply logs, patrol coordination. But inside she felt the coil tightening, the quiet before a storm. Marines saluted her with sharper precision. Some avoided her altogether. In their eyes she saw two things she hated: admiration and fear. Late at night she opened her locker again, stared at the photo she carried. The smiling family. The reminder of why she had ever agreed to walk into shadows. Not for glory, not for medals, but for people who would never know her name, who would never have to see the things she saw. Her breath caught as she whispered to the photo, "How many more before it ends?" The photo gave no answer. Meanwhile, far beyond Okinawa, a man sat in a darkened room, lit only by the glow of a monitor. His face was scarred, his eyes hard. He leaned forward as an intercepted radio clip replayed. "Phantom 7 is alive." A slow smile curved his lips. "Then the hunt begins." Back on base, Sarah sat in the mess hall, untouched food on her tray. The young lieutenant she had rescued approached hesitantly, sitting across from her. "I never got to thank you," he said, voice soft, almost reverent. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You don't need to." "No, I do. I was dead in that camp, and you," his words faltered, "you walked me out like it was nothing." Her eyes darkened. It wasn't nothing. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then quietly he asked, "Why do they call you Phantom 7? Sarah stared at him, her breath caught between confession and silence. The truth pressed at her lips, but she swallowed it down. "Because some stories aren't meant to be told," she said at last. He looked at her as if he'd glimpsed something both terrifying and sacred. That night Sarah dreamed again, not of victory, not of survival, but of shadows closing in, voices calling her name, and the weight of footsteps hunting her across a barren field. She woke with a start, sweat clinging to her skin. For a long time, she sat at the edge of her bed, staring into the dark. She thought she had come back to rest, but rest was a luxury ghosts never earned. And now the world had remembered her. At dawn, as the sun bled over the horizon, Sarah stood alone on the parade ground. The base stirred awake around her, but she felt apart from it, distant. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the gravity of a vow. If they want Phantom 7, they'll find her, but they'll never break her. Far away in a different time zone, a convoy of armed trucks moved across the desert. The scarred man rode in the front seat, eyes on the horizon. His voice rasped with promise. "Find her, end her, and bury the ghost once and for all." And in the stillness of Okinawa, Sarah felt the storm drawing closer. Why was the base suddenly so restless, as if the walls themselves sensed danger? The days after the ambush rescue carried a tension that no routine could mask. Recruits marched the same drills, engines roared across the airfield, supply trucks rumbled in and out, yet beneath the ordinary rhythm, something sharp coiled. Conversations fell quiet when Sarah entered the room. Radios hissed with half-cleared channels. Even the colonel walked the grounds with his jaw clenched tighter than usual. News had reached them, intercepted transmissions vague but chilling, a name spoken with venom across enemy frequencies. Phantom 7. Sarah carried on as if blind to it, but inside, every repetition of the name felt like a chain tightening around her chest. She didn't want this. She had come here to fade, to let the shadows consume her story until nothing was left. But shadows never stayed buried when the world kept digging them up. Colonel Whitaker called another briefing. The room was dim, blinds drawn, a low hum of tension running through the assembled officers. On the wall, projected images showed convoys in the desert, armed columns shifting positions. Reports flickered, rising insurgent coordination, attacks more precise than before. "They've unified," Whitaker said, his voice heavy, "and they've set their sights beyond supply runs. We believe they're planning strikes on bases, embassies, civilian zones." He tapped the screen. "And this isn't just about territory. They're hunting a ghost." His eyes slid briefly toward Sarah, though he never said her name. Murmurs rippled through the room. One officer scoffed softly, trying to dispel the unease. "Hunting a ghost? Sir, with respect, are we really putting stock in enemy folklore?" Whitaker's gaze hardened. "You weren't in Helmand in 2010. You didn't see what I saw. Folklore can move armies. Belief can be more dangerous than bullets." Sarah stayed silent, her back straight, her face unreadable, but her pulse quickened. She knew what was coming, an escalation she could neither control nor ignore. Later that night, she sat in her quarters, staring at the photograph she always carried, the smiling family whose lives she had once saved. Her fingers traced the edges of the worn paper, her mind replaying the words the mother had whispered. "So you'll remember why you fight." But what if fighting meant never being free? What if every mission dragged her deeper into a war she could never escape? She pressed her eyes shut. She wanted silence, peace, a life where her name wasn't whispered in fear or awe, but peace was for the living. Ghosts carried only the weight of unfinished battles. A knock broke her thoughts. The young lieutenant she had rescued stepped in hesitantly. His face was pale, as if he'd carried a secret too long. "They're saying your name," he whispered. "Not just here, out there. The enemy knows you're alive." She didn't move, didn't even flinch. "I know." He swallowed hard. "Why don't you tell them the truth? Why not deny it?" Her gaze lifted, sharp as steel. "Because denial doesn't erase a shadow, it only makes it grow." The following morning, the base stirred with unusual urgency. Trucks rolled out earlier, patrols doubled. Sarah noticed men she didn't recognize, special intelligence officers moving across the grounds, watching everyone too closely. Whitaker summoned her again, but this time, the conversation carried an edge she hadn't expected. "There are eyes on you, Lieutenant," he said, lowering his voice. "Not just the enemy, ours. The higher-ups want to know who you really are, what you're hiding. Some of them think you're an asset. Others," he paused, "others think you're a liability." Sarah's chest tightened. "A liability." "They fear what they can't control. You don't answer to anyone but orders long buried. That terrifies men who live off paperwork and politics." Her breath caught sharp. "So what now? They want me gone?" Whitaker shook his head slowly. "They want to test you, push you into the light, see if the shadow breaks." Her eyes narrowed. "And if I do? Then they might do the enemy's work for them." The words lingered with her long after she left his office. Trust had always been fragile in her world, but to feel the weight of suspicion from her own side, from the very institution she had bled for, it twisted something inside her. That evening, as she walked across the parade ground, she felt the eyes again. Recruits staring, whispering, some in awe, others in fear. And one man, tall, clean-cut, uniform pressed sharper than most, didn't look away when she met his gaze. His stare was unflinching, his expression unreadable. An intelligence officer, she guessed. Watching, measuring. The storm was closing in from all sides. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of Okinawa, the enemy prepared. The scarred man, Malik, once a warlord's enforcer, now a leader in his own right, studied a map spread before him. His voice rasped with cold certainty. She humiliated us once. She will not do it again. This time we draw her out. We bleed her base until she comes to us. One of his men shifted nervously. And if she does? Malik's scarred lips curved into something like a smile. She will. Ghosts always return to their graves. Back on base, Sarah found herself restless, unable to sit still. She walked the perimeter under the dim glow of security lights, her boots crunching against gravel. The night air smelled of salt and jet fuel. Her thoughts tangled. Was she protecting them by staying or endangering them? Every shadow outside the wire felt closer. Every whisper inside the wire cut deeper. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and whispered to herself, "Don't break. Don't let them see you break." The next day, Whitaker gathered a select group in the war room. Among them was Sarah. The colonel's expression was darker than usual, his voice heavy with unspoken weight. "Intelligence confirms it," he said. "They're not just planning ambushes anymore. They're planning to hit us here. Hard. They want Phantom 7 exposed, and they'll throw men bombs, everything they've got until they succeed." Silence blanketed the room. Finally, an officer asked the question that hung over all of them. What if Phantom 7 isn't exposed? What if she doesn't exist? The colonel's eyes drifted toward Sarah, but he didn't answer. Instead, his silence gave her a choice, one she didn't want, but one she had always known was inevitable. Either stay hidden, let the legend collapse and risk the base being torn apart, or step into the open, embrace the shadow and fight. That night, Sarah stood at her locker, staring at the photo again. The smiling family, a reminder of why she had once given everything. She whispered into the silence, "Do I disappear again, or do I finally let the world see what I became?" The fan above her clicked softly, the only reply. Far away, Malik's men loaded trucks with weapons, explosives, fuel. The convoy rumbled into the desert night, headlights dimmed, engines growling like beasts preparing to strike. And in Okinawa, Sarah felt the air shift. A storm was coming. At dawn, she walked across the empty parade ground, boots steady, heart heavy. She could feel it, the fight was on its way. The question was no longer if Phantom 7 would rise again. The question was, what would it cost this time? Why did the night feel too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath? The base at Okinawa hummed with its usual rhythm, trucks idling, distant laughter in the barracks, the low whine of generators. Yet beneath the familiar noise, Sarah felt it, the stillness between sounds, the way the wind carried nothing but tension. She sat on her bunk, boots laced, uniform crisp, staring at the locker she hadn't closed all the way. Inside, the photo of the family leaned against her gear. She touched it briefly, fingers trembling. Then she heard it, faint at first, then sharper. A crack in the distance, not thunder, not a drill. Gunfire. The alarm ripped through the base seconds later, sirens wailing, boots hitting floors, voices shouting commands into the dark. Sarah was already moving before her mind caught up. Years of training didn't wait for permission. Her body was instinct, pure reaction. She grabbed her sidearm, slid the knife into its sheath, and was out the door. Colonel Whitaker was already on the command floor, voice steady but edged with urgency. "We're under coordinated attack. Enemy vehicles breached the south perimeter. Mortars incoming. Move all civilians to bunkers. Lock down comms. No one moves alone." He saw Sarah enter, eyes narrowing. "Lieutenant, this isn't your fight." But even as he said it, the walls shook from an explosion, rattling glass and nerves alike. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Colonel, with respect, this fight found me a long time ago." Their eyes locked. For a moment, it was like all the years between them, all the missions, all the ghosts collided in that single look. Finally, Whitaker gave the smallest nod. "Then make it count." The The base erupted in chaos. Mortars thudded against the outer walls, shrapnel raining down. Enemy vehicles slammed through fences, gunfire shredding the night. Marines scrambled to firing positions, some barely awake, some already bleeding. Sarah moved through it like a current cutting water. Her steps were swift, her eyes sharp, her focus absolute. She pulled a wounded recruit to cover, pressed a rifle into his hands, whispered calm into his panic. She scanned the perimeter, saw where the breach widened, and headed straight for it. Every instinct screamed at her, stay unseen, stay a ghost. But ghosts didn't save bases. Ghosts slipped in and out of places where no one else could go. This was different. This was survival, not just hers, but everyone. At the southern wall, flames painted the sky. Enemy trucks burned, but more poured through the gaps. Sarah dropped low, slid behind a barrier, and took aim. A shot cracked from her rifle, clean, precise. One enemy down. Another fell before he could reach the gate controls. Marines around her glanced sideways. Her movements weren't like theirs. She didn't fire wild bursts. She didn't duck and pray. She was deliberate, lethal, efficient. And the whispers began. She's not logistics. Who the hell is she? I think that's Phantom 7. The name spread faster than the gunfire. Colonel Whitaker heard it too, over comms in the cracks of radio chatter. Phantom 7. It hit his chest like a weight he had carried for years. The legend was no longer a shadow. It was standing in the fire, undeniable. And it terrified him, not because of what she was, but because of what it would cost her. Sarah moved deeper into the breach. Enemy fighters surged, but her body remembered everything she had tried to forget. She flowed between cover, struck with precision, dismantled threats before they had a chance to aim. Her knife flashed once, silent and final. A Marine beside her stumbled, weapon jammed, eyes wide in panic. Sarah stepped forward, fired over his shoulder, and pulled him back. "Keep moving," she hissed. The boy stared at her as if she wasn't flesh and blood but something else, something unreal. You're her." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The battle raged for hours that felt like days. Smoke thickened, cries echoed, steel clashed with will. And through it all, Sarah carried the fight not as a soldier seeking victory, but as a ghost refusing to let the living fall where she stood. Finally, as dawn bled across the horizon, the last mortar fell silent. Enemy survivors fled into the distance, their vehicles retreating into the hills. The base stood, scarred but unbroken. Marines staggered from cover, faces smeared with ash, uniforms torn. Medics moved swiftly, calling for stretchers. The air reeked of smoke and sweat and something heavier, the weight of what had just happened. And in the center of it, Sarah stood, not hidden, not erased. "Seen?" Colonel Whitaker approached her slowly, his face marked by exhaustion and something deeper. He looked at her not as a commanding officer, but as a man who had just watched history repeat itself. "Phantom 7, he said softly, almost reverently. Sarah's chest rose and fell with tired breaths. Her eyes were steady, though shadows lingered behind them. "I told you, Colonel, I didn't come back to fight." She looked out over the base, Marines staring at her like she was more myth than woman. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But sometimes the fight doesn't give you a choice." For the men and women who had seen her that night, there would be no forgetting. The logistics officer had vanished. In her place stood a legend, alive and unyielding. But legends come with a price. And Sarah knew that with every whisper of her name, the target on her back grew larger. In the smoking ruins of the desert, Malik stood with his men, eyes narrowed against the rising sun. Reports came in, voices stammering. Their assault had failed, their forces scattered. But the scarred man only smiled, slow and cold. "So it's true," he rasped. "Phantom 7 lives." He turned to his lieutenants. "Then we bleed her world, piece by piece, until she has nowhere left to hide." Back at the base, Sarah sat alone in the infirmary, bandaging a cut on her arm. Around her, medics worked on wounded Marines, voices low, movements hurried. She watched them quietly, the guilt pressing hard. Some would live, some wouldn't. And though she had fought with everything she had, the weight of their suffering settled on her shoulders as if it were her fault alone. Because in her mind it was. If she hadn't spoken that name, if she had kept the ghost buried, would the attack have come? Would these men be lying here, broken, bleeding because of her? She closed her eyes, a whisper escaping her lips. Ghosts don't rest. They destroy everything they touch. Colonel Whitaker entered, his presence filling the room. He stopped in front of her, studying her expression. You saved this base tonight. Don't carry their wounds like they're yours. Her gaze lifted, pain defiant. They are mine. Whitaker shook his head slowly. You can't carry everyone. Even shadows have limits. She didn't answer, couldn't. Because deep down she knew he was wrong. Ghosts didn't have limits. Ghosts walked until they broke. Outside, Marines whispered her name, half in awe, half in fear. Phantom 7. And Sarah, sitting in the quiet of the infirmary, felt the world she had tried to leave pulling her deeper than ever before. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Malik's men armed again. The next strike would be harder, sharper, aimed not at a base, but at her soul. And Sarah knew it. The storm wasn't over. It had only begun. Why did the silence after the battle feel heavier than the battle itself? The base still smoldered. Charred vehicles lined the southern wall, sandbags shredded, bullet holes carved across concrete. The acrid smell of burned fuel lingered, clinging to uniforms and skin. Marines walked slower that morning, their bodies carrying exhaustion, their eyes carrying something heavier. Sarah moved among them quietly. She helped where she could, hauling debris, steadying a wounded soldier as he was carried toward the infirmary. Yet everywhere she went, eyes followed her. Not casual glances, not curiosity, something sharper. Reverence. Fear. Phantom 7. The whispers drifted behind her like shadows that wouldn't fade. She didn't want it. Not the name. Not the weight. She wanted to return to the woman who filed supply requests, who laughed faintly at bad jokes in the chow line. But that woman was gone now. The battlefield had stripped away her disguise, and in its place stood a legend she had fought so hard to bury. Colonel Whitaker found her by the wall, kneeling beside the burned wreckage of a truck. Her hands were dirty, her face streaked with ash, but her eyes were far away. You shouldn't be out here, he said softly. Sarah didn't look up. Neither should they, she murmured, nodding toward the stretchers lined up near the infirmary. Young men bandaged, broken, some alive, some not. Whitaker's jaw tightened. That wasn't your fault. She turned to him sharply. Wasn't it? They came here for me. You said it yourself. They want Phantom 7. And now good men are dead because I couldn't stay buried. The colonel's gaze softened, but his voice stayed firm. You didn't bring this fight here, Sarah. They did. And you didn't let it consume us. That's the difference. She looked away, swallowing hard. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to still them. Ghosts don't protect people, Colonel. They haunt them. And now I've haunted this place. Later that night, she sat in her quarters alone, the lights off, the room lit only by the faint glow of the moon through her window. She pulled the photo from her locker again, the smiling family, edges worn thin. She whispered into the stillness, as if the faces could hear her. Tell me I did the right thing. Tell me I didn't drag them into my war. Her voice cracked on the last word. For a long time she sat there, clutching the photo, the silence pressing harder than any interrogation ever had. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Malik's men regrouped. The scarred commander studied his maps, tracing routes with his finger. His voice was low, controlled, almost calm, more terrifying than rage. She showed herself, he said. She fought and she bled. That means she can be broken. One of his lieutenants hesitated. She's only one woman. Malik's scarred lips curved into something cruel. One woman who humiliated us. One woman who turned ghosts into legends. Do you know how you kill a legend? The lieutenant shook his head. You don't. You break the people who believe in it. You burn everything around it until the legend stands alone. And then you crush her. Back in Okinawa, Marines gathered in small groups, talking in hushed tones. Some told the story of the night before with awe, embellishing it like campfire myth. Others spoke in quiet fear, as if invoking her name might summon more war. The young Lieutenant Sarah had rescued sat with them, his voice steadier now. You don't understand, I saw her. I watched her move through that camp like smoke. She's real. Phantom 7 is real. Real doesn't mean invincible, another muttered. If they're hunting her, we're the ones who'll bleed for it. The words carried weight. Sarah heard them later passing by, though the Marines didn't know she was within earshot. Their fear stung sharper than bullets. She wanted to shout, to tell them she hadn't asked for this, that she wasn't a legend, that she was just a tired woman who wanted peace. But legends didn't get to speak. Legends were written by others, with or without consent. Colonel Whitaker called her into his office again. The blinds were drawn, the air thick with smoke from the cigar he hadn't finished. He looked older than he had days ago, lines etched deeper into his face. They've escalated, he said simply. Intelligence confirms Malik is behind this. He's not just coming for you, Sarah. He's coming for everyone around you. Her hands tightened at her sides. Then transfer me, send me away if I'm not here. It won't matter, Whitaker cut in. His voice was low, steady. He won't stop, he'll follow you. He'll bleed bases, convoys, villages until he draws you out again. This isn't about where you are, it's about what you are. Sarah swallowed hard. Then what am I, Colonel? He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, a reminder that shadows can save as much as they haunt. His words cut deep but not clean. She wanted to believe them, wanted to think her past meant more than scars and blood, but the image of the wounded Marines wouldn't leave her. That evening she walked the perimeter alone. The sky was a bruised purple, the sea beyond the wire whispering against the shore. She paused by the south wall, fingers grazing the bullet-pocked concrete. Her breath hitched. She could still hear it, the screams, the gunfire, the silence afterward. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, don't let me break them. Don't let me destroy what I'm trying to save. But the cracks were already forming. In the days that followed, Marines began to treat her differently. Some saluted sharper, as if honoring a figure larger than life. Others avoided her, slipping down different hallways, choosing different tables in the chow hall. She had become both protector and omen, hope and curse. And she felt the distance growing, the isolation deepening. Phantom 7 was back, but Sarah Keating was fatting. In the dead of night, a coded message slipped through base communications, unnoticed by most. But when the colonel saw it the next morning, his blood ran cold. A single line. Phantom 7 dies, or your men will. Whitaker didn't show her the message immediately. He carried it in silence, debating. If he told her, she'd take it on her shoulders alone, walk straight into the fire. If he kept it, he risked betrayal when she inevitably discovered the truth. But one thing was clear, the enemy wasn't just coming. They were here, reaching inside the walls. That night Sarah dreamed again, not of battles past but of the future. She saw the base burning, Marines falling one by one, her own hands stained with their blood. She woke gasping, the photo still clutched in her hand. For a long time she sat in the dark, whispering to herself. You wanted peace. You wanted rest, but maybe ghosts don't get peace. Maybe ghosts only get redemption. And far away, Malik's convoy rolled through the desert night. His scarred hand tightened on the wheel. Prepare the strike, he ordered. Not against her, not yet, against what she protects. We'll see how long the ghost can watch others burn. Back at Okinawa, Sarah stood on the parade ground at dawn, the whispers of Phantom 7 circling her like a storm. Her eyes scanned the horizon, heart heavy, soul torn between two truths. That she wanted nothing more than to disappear. And that disappearing would kill more than staying ever could. The storm wasn't just coming. It was already here. Why did the first explosion sound different, sharper, closer, deliberate? The morning had been almost peaceful. Marines ran drills on the parade ground, engines roared from the motor pool, and Sarah sat in the mess hall sipping coffee she didn't taste. She had almost convinced herself that the storm might hold off, that perhaps Malik's threats were still far away. Then the blast came. The windows rattled, the ground trembled. Screams cut across the base as smoke rose from the east perimeter. Before the alarm even wailed, Sarah was already moving, boots pounding across the asphalt. Colonel Whitaker reached the scene moments later, his face grim. A supply truck had been hit inside the wire, the wreckage burning, Marines dragging the wounded out of the flames. "Inside the base," he growled. "How the hell did they get inside the wire?" Sarah scanned the wreckage. This wasn't random. It wasn't a mortar lobbed from distance. The placement was too precise, the timing too sharp. This was infiltration. "They didn't just breach the base," she said quietly. "They had help." The words landed heavy. Whitaker turned to her, jaw tight. "Are you saying someone on the inside?" "I'm saying Malik doesn't strike blind. He knew where to hurt us." The following hours bled into chaos. Patrols doubled, checkpoints multiplied. Intelligence officers swept through barracks searching for any sign of betrayal. Marines whispered louder now, not just about Phantom 7, but about the danger she brought with her. "She's the reason they're coming. If they want her, maybe we should let them take her." "You shut your mouth, she saved us." "Saved us once, but how many more will die because she's here?" Sarah heard fragments as she walked past. Each word cut deeper than shrapnel. She told herself she had no right to be wounded by them. They weren't wrong. Malik wasn't just hunting her. He was hunting everyone who stood near her. That night Whitaker called her into his office again. His face was pale with exhaustion, his eyes carrying more years than his age. On his desk lay the coded message he hadn't shown her before. "Phantom 7 dies, or your men will." He slid it across to her without a word. Sarah read it once, then again. Her pulse stayed steady, but her jaw tightened. "You should have told me sooner." "I knew what you'd do," Whitaker said, his voice rough. "You'd walk straight into their trap, and maybe that's what they want, but I'll be damned if I let you carry it alone." Her eyes lifted, fierce. "You don't get to choose that for me, Colonel. Every life they take, every bomb they plant, it's on me now." Whitaker slammed his fist against the desk, the sound sharp. "No, Sarah, it's on them, the ones pulling the trigger, the ones planting the bombs. Don't you dare take their sins onto your back." But she didn't answer, because deep down she already had. The next strike came 2 days later. A convoy leaving the base carrying medical supplies hit an IED on the road. 3 Marines dead, 2 civilians. Sarah stood at the wreckage hours later, the air thick with smoke and grief. She stared at the bodies lined in silence, the flag draped over them, and felt her chest hollow out. Malik wasn't aiming for her directly. He was carving her world apart, piece by piece, until she had no choice but to come to him. And it was working. That night, the rescued lieutenant found her sitting alone by the seawall, staring out at the endless black of the ocean. "You're not eating," he said quietly, sitting beside her. Sarah didn't look at him. "I don't deserve to." He frowned. "Don't say that. You've done more for us than—" "Then what?" "Then the men who are dead because Malik wants me." She turned, eyes sharp, voice breaking. "Every life he takes is a message, and I'm the one reading it." The lieutenant hesitated, then spoke carefully. "You can't fight this alone. You're not just Phantom 7 anymore. Whether you like it or not, they're looking to you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to cling to the idea that she could stay the lone shadow, the ghost slipping in and out without attachment. But when she walked the base now, she saw it in their eyes. They didn't just whisper her name anymore. They waited for her. And that terrified her more than Malik ever could. Meanwhile, Malik prepared his next move. His convoy cut across the desert, headlights blacked out, men armed to the teeth. He sat in the front seat, Scar catching the glow of the dashboard. "Hit them where it hurts," he ordered. "Not their walls, their heart. Take their young, take their hope. Make Phantom 7 watch her family bleed." Back in Okinawa, Whitaker gathered his officers. The room was tense, the maps on the table littered with red pins marking recent attacks. "They're escalating," Whitaker said, his voice rough. "They're not just striking supply lines anymore. They're targeting us where it breaks morale. And make no mistake, they won't stop until they force Phantom 7 into the open." All eyes shifted, almost unconsciously, toward Sarah. She sat rigid, hands clasped tight, her expression unreadable. But inside, the truth burned like fire. He's right. They won't stop. Not until they have me. Whitaker's gaze met hers. "You don't have to decide tonight, but soon." Her heart pounded. Decide. To stay the ghost, let others bleed for her shadow, or step into the open, become what they already believed she was. Not just Phantom 7, a leader. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. The barracks were too quiet, the air too heavy. She sat at the edge of her bed, the photo of the family in her hand again. "You told me to remember why I fight," she whispered to the worn paper. "But what if fighting means I lose everything left of me?" Her eyes stung, but no tears fell. Ghosts didn't cry. Ghosts carried, always carried. The next dawn broke with blood. An enemy squad, slipping through the shadows, hit a patrol just outside the wire. Young Marines, barely trained, barely men, fell before they knew they were under attack. Sarah arrived too late to save them, too late to stop the lifeless eyes staring up at her from the dirt. And something inside her cracked. That evening she stood in the middle of the parade ground. Marines gathered, drawn by something unspoken. Whitaker stood at the edge, watching, silent. Sarah's voice was low at first, but carried. "They're not coming for this base. They're not coming for supplies or convoys. They're coming for me." The words hit the crowd like thunder. Silence stretched. "I try to stay a ghost," she continued. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "I tried to disappear so no one else would carry my burden, but ghosts don't get to choose. And I won't let Malik carve this place apart piece by piece." She looked around, her hazel eyes sharp, steady. "If he wants Phantom 7, then he'll get her, but not the way he thinks. Not as a shadow in the dark, as a soldier standing with you, not above you, with you." The silence held a beat longer. Then one by one Marines straightened, not out of fear, not out of awe, but out of something rarer. Belief. Whitaker felt his chest tighten. He had seen men rally before, but never like this. Never around someone who didn't ask for the mantle but carried it anyway. Phantom 7 wasn't just a ghost anymore. She was theirs. Far across the desert, Malik's convoy stopped at a ridge. He scanned the horizon through binoculars, a cruel smile spreading across his scarred face. "She's coming into the light," he murmured. "Good, that's where legends die." And in Okinawa, as the last rays of sun burned red across the sky, Sarah stood at the center of the base, her heart heavy but unbroken. The choice was made. No more running, no more silence. Phantom 7 had returned. But at what cost? Why did the night feel heavier than any battle before, as if the earth itself was bracing for what was to come? The base was quiet but not peaceful. The Marines knew. Even the young ones, barely through training, felt it in their bones. Malik was coming. Not with whispers this time, not with scattered bombs or distant threats. He would come with fire and fury until either Phantom 7 broke or everything around her burned. Sarah stood at the edge of the parade ground, watching the horizon. Her uniform was simple, stripped of anything extra. The only weight she carried was inside: ghosts, regrets, and the choice she had finally made. She was no longer trying to disappear. She was no longer pretending to be anyone else. Beside her, Colonel Whitaker lit a cigar, the flame briefly illuminating the lines in his face. He took a drag, exhaled slow. "You ready for this?" Sarah didn't look at him. "No one's ever ready, not really, but that doesn't matter." He nodded once, as if he'd expected nothing less. At dawn, the desert shook. Malik's convoy thundered forward, dozens of trucks bristling with weapons, fighters packed in the beds, chanting. Dust clouds rolled like storm fronts, the sun glinting off steel and rifles. In the lead vehicle, Malik stood upright, Scar catching the light, eyes burning with obsession. "Today," he rasped, "the ghost dies." On the base, alarms blared. Marines scrambled to positions, heavy guns mounted, sandbags reinforced. The air pulsed with adrenaline and fear, but beneath it all was something steadier: resolve. Because for the first time, they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting alongside her. Sarah moved through the ranks, calm but sharp. She checked weapons, steadied trembling hands, met eyes with the young ones who looked at her not as a myth, but as their own. "You're not alone," she told one boy, barely 19, his rifle shaking in his grip. "Not while I'm here." He swallowed, nodded, and his hands steadied. The first strike came with mortars, the ground erupting in flames and dirt. The walls shook, but the Marines held. Machine guns roared in response, cutting into the charging convoy. Smoke and fire swallowed the horizon, screams tearing through the air. And in the middle of it, Sarah moved. Not hidden, not invisible, but seen. She flowed across the battlefield with precision, leading squads into cover, pulling the wounded to safety, firing with lethal calm. Every shot, every step carried the weight of her past, not as a ghost slipping in and out, but as a soldier standing in the open, unyielding. Malik pushed his men harder, fury twisting his scarred face. "Bring her to me," he roared. "I want Phantom 7's head." His fighters surged, reckless, desperate, but the base didn't break. Because she didn't break. Hours dragged like lifetimes. The sun climbed high, smoke thickened, ammunition thinned. Bodies lay where they fell, and still the battle raged. At one point, Sarah found herself pinned behind a shattered wall, bullets cutting the air inches above her. A young Marine beside her bled from his leg, panic in his eyes. "Am I going to die here?" he gasped. Sarah pressed her hand over the wound, her voice steady. "Not today, not while I'm breathing." Her words weren't bravado, they were a vow. She rose, fired 3 shots, and the line holding them fell silent. The boy looked at her with something like faith, not in a legend but in her. As the battle stretched into its final brutal hours, Malik himself pushed forward. His vehicle smashed through the outer barrier, and he stepped onto the field like a man chasing destiny. His men spread around him, covering his advance, but his eyes were fixed on one figure. "Sorry." "Phantom 7, he bellowed across the chaos. "Come face me or watch them all die." The battlefield seemed to pause. Sarah stepped forward, dust and blood clinging to her uniform, rifle steady in her hands. "I'm right here." The two locked eyes across the distance, hunter and hunted, shadow and scar. For Malik it was vengeance. For Sarah it was inevitability. She moved fast, precise. He fired first, wild and furious, bullets cutting the air. She ducked, rolled, returned fire, not wasted, not desperate. Each shot deliberate. His men fell around him, one by one, until it was just him. They closed the distance, the chaos of the battle falling away until it was only the two of them in the storm. Malik swung a blade, fury in his scarred face. Sarah caught his wrist, twisted, felt the steel graze her arm. Pain seared, but she held. With her other hand she drove her knife into his shoulder, forcing him to the dirt. His breath came ragged, his eyes burning with hatred even as blood seeped through his uniform. "You can't kill a ghost," she whispered, pressing him down. Malik snarled through gritted teeth. "Then ghosts will haunt forever." And with one final, precise strike, Sarah ended it. The battlefield went silent. Slowly the gunfire faded, the last echoes of violence carried away by the wind. Malik's men scattered, their leader gone, their fury broken. The base stood, scarred, bleeding, but unbroken. And at its center, Sarah stood exhausted, wounded, but alive. Colonel Whitaker approached through the haze of smoke, his boots crunching against the rubble. He looked at her with something beyond respect, beyond awe, something closer to sorrow. "You did it," he said softly. Her eyes lifted, heavy, distant. "No, Colonel, we did it." He nodded slowly, because he understood. Phantom 7 had not saved the base. Sarah Keating had, by standing not as a ghost, but as one of them. In the days that followed, the base rebuilt. Graves were dug, names read aloud, silence held for the fallen. Sarah stood among them, head bowed, her chest hollow but steady. The Marines whispered her name still, but it had changed. It wasn't fear now, it wasn't myth, it was memory, gratitude. And she knew the truth. Legends don't survive because they are invincible. They survive because others carry them forward. One evening, as the sun sank over the sea, Sarah sat alone by the seawall, the photograph of the smiling family in her hand. She traced the edges once more, then tucked it gently back into her pocket. Whitaker joined her quietly, standing with his hands behind his back. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally he said, "What now?" She watched the horizon, her voice soft but steady. "Now I keep walking, not as a ghost, not as Phantom 7, just as someone who remembers." He nodded, and they stood together in silence as the light faded. And when the night came, the whispers carried not of fear but of quiet truth. That sometimes the strongest soldier is the one who never asked to be a legend. That sometimes the burden of ghosts is not to haunt, but to protect. And that sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.